Welcome to the build story. For a couple dreaming of a life in this rugged landscape, this was not just a construction project, it was the beginning of a new chapter. He began his project at a pre-selected site where the footprint of the house was already marked out on the ground with logs. Instead of using traditional round logs, he chose square-hewn logs for a unique look. The construction of the walls began with a meticulous process. He cut special interlocking joints called notches into the ends of each log. This allowed them to fit together snugly at the corners. As he stacked the logs, he created a pattern where the end of every other log stuck out past the corner, giving the cabin a classic, rustic appearance. To ensure a tight seal between the logs, he applied a special tape and then secured them firmly with a hammer and nails. Once the walls were a few feet high, he brought his tools, a staircase, and a trolley inside the growing structure. With the help of the crane, he lifted more square logs over the walls and into the building area. He continued this process, carefully stacking one log on top of another until the walls reached their full intended height. With the walls complete, it was time to create the openings. The man carefully cut out the space for the main door. the roof, which he designed in a classic triangular shape, he first installed a long, central wooden plank called a ridge beam. This beam runs along the peak of the roof. Next, he attached angled planks, known as rafters, from the top of the walls up to the ridge beam. These rafters formed the skeleton of the roof. In front of the main door, he built a small porch with its own floor and a separate, smaller roof that sat just below the main one. The roof was then completed in layers. First, he laid down a protective sheet material. On top of that, he installed a grid of wooden strips called battens. For a touch of craftsmanship, he cut a beautiful signature design into the exposed ends of the roof rafters. Finally, he covered everything with a durable metal roof. For the entrance, he built a staircase and flanked it with 2 posts. Between these posts, he constructed a palisade fence using vertical logs connected with notches, avoiding the use of nails for a traditional look. For extra stability, he drilled holes through the logs and threaded a metal wire. He then framed and installed the windows and the main door, outlining them with more planks to complete their look. To bring in more light, he added a few windows to the side of the front porch. The final touch was applying a protective coating to the porch roof, finishing the beautiful and resilient Alaskan cabin. The man's next step was to secure a source of water and heat. He brought in a large truck equipped with a drilling rig and a derrick. The powerful drill bored deep into the earth, creating a well to supply fresh water. From the well, a narrow trench was dug all the way to the house. A yellow insulated pipe was laid in this trench, and flexible PEX tubing was used to make the final connections. To protect the pipes from the extreme cold, every connection point was sealed with spray foam insulation. To house the system that would run everything, he built a small, separate well house. The floor was carefully insulated, first with spray foam around the main water pipe, and then with thick mineral wool bats between the floor joists. The well house was built using the same sturdy techniques as the main cabin, complete with solid wood sheathing and a metal roof. The focus shifted to making the inside of the cabin comfortable and beautiful. For heating, a modern radiant floor system was installed. A network of PEX tubing was laid out across the entire floor. Hot water from the heater would flow through these tubes, warming the floor from below. To complete the system, a layer of self-leveling underlayment was poured over the tubes, creating a smooth, solid floor that radiates heat evenly throughout the house. Insulation was key to keeping the warmth in. The ceiling rafters in the main house were filled with thick batt insulation. A large plastic vapor barrier was then carefully installed over the insulation, with the man's grandson helping to put it in place. Every seam was sealed with special tape, and the edges were secured with a caulking gun to make it airtight. For the interior finishing, the man and his family began adding the details that would make it a home. Inside this crucial little building, the heating equipment and the water pressure tank were installed, creating the heart of the home's utility systems. With the utilities in place, After installing wooden flooring, they created a stunning decorative accent wall using a wave-like wooden frame, which was then filled with a beautiful pattern of river stones. In the kitchen area, they built custom cabinets and a countertop. Carefully cutting the opening for a double sink and applying a durable laminate surface. For storage, shelves were crafted from black iron pipes for a rustic, industrial look. As a magnificent centerpiece, the man took a set of moose antlers and skillfully transformed them into a unique antler chandelier, which became a beautiful source of light. Finally, with the help of his wife, the last major task was completed, installing wooden blinds on all the windows, giving them privacy and control over the natural light.
Paddle traveled steadily westward along the west shore of Lake Superior. Sometimes lake currents pushed him forward, putting barrels of butter, crates of eggs, and boxes of vegetables.
The family had worked together to build not just a structure, but a warm, beautiful, and perfectly crafted home in the heart of Alaska.